Okay, so what is the story of your calling to ministry and how has that path brought you to where you are today?
Oh my goodness, that's the long one. I was in seminary studying counseling as a master's program, and I was a junior, and the head of the school called me in and said, "You're in the wrong major." And I said, "No." And it was a holiness seminary. And so I thought maybe I had dressed wrong or I had put on lipstick when I shouldn't have, or, those kinds of things. And he said, "No, uh, the Lord has been speaking to my wife and I, and we believe that you are in the wrong major." I'm 38 years old, I have 3 children, and I'm in the wrong major. And this is master's work. Nobody wants to do that twice. Excuse me. And he said, "And we're not going to graduate you in this program."
Wow.
I said, "I'm a straight A student. What grounds would you have for not graduating me?" He said, "In this school, we believe what God tells us to do is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that you're in the wrong major." And I was angry and frustrated. And he said, "We want you to go home over the summer and talk to God about this. And if you decide to do it your way and not his, don't come back." It's called getting put in a corner. And the first couple of weeks, I was way too angry to talk to God or anybody else. I was furious to think that I wouldn't know my own mind at that point. But eventually, I got around to talking to God. And God made it pretty clear that I needed to go into the ministerial program. And I'm thinking, okay, God, you got me mixed up with somebody else because this is a guy's field and women have a hard time and I have a family and blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
I tried every argument I could. They're about as useless as arguing with God always is. And I finally said, "Okay, I'll do what you want," thinking this is just going to be a fiasco. And I went back and I told them. And no, I was a sophomore when that happened, not a junior. And they said, "Well, finally, now we at least know you listen to God." So I put in that whole next year in the proper major. And then I had to come back. I was out of state, and I had to come back here because my mom needed me. And so I moved my family back here, and a girlfriend of mine asked me if I would teach at the Bible College in Pontiac, Midwestern. And I thought, I'm a Pentecostal, and that's a Baptist school, and they're not going to want me. And she said, "You're not teaching theology." And I already had an undergrad degree in English.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to teach English and music theory. And so I said, "Sure." And at the end of my second year of teaching, which I was teaching night school, I got a call just before graduation wanting to know if I'd come in for my cap and gown, because all faculty goes to graduation. And I said, "Well, if it fits so-and-so, it'll fit me, just measure her." "No, you don't quite understand. You've been teaching for credit, and you're going to graduate."
Oh, wow.
And my girlfriend, who was the dean of women, had set it up so that I could finally get my degree. And I had done all of the theology courses prior to going there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just basically, every time she'd ask me to teach a new class, I didn't think anything of it. And I was teaching for credit.
Cool.
So I graduated and eventually went back to New England and pastored. And then I got cancer, and they didn't get it all, so I came back here, and they cleaned up that mess, and found another one, and we got through that, and then I went back and pastored again. And that time wasn't as successful. And I came back here and started volunteering here in the church office, and eventually ended up with a permanent job.
Very cool.
That is, believe me, the encapsulated version of that.
So, what is the most challenging aspect of leading your particular ministry, past or present?
Two things. One, trying to be sure you hear God, that you're not leading somebody in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And two, being a woman in a man's field, it's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't get any easier. You are constantly battling for position, battling for, three men have applied for the job, and you're the one woman they called, and they'd really like you, but there's the guy on the board who doesn't want a woman. And it's a frustrating thing. You've got to be able to take it.
I'm going there myself.
Huh?
That's something I'll have to deal with as well.
Because that's your field, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's tough. You got to have thick skin.
Yeah.
Because the older people in the church have real preconceived ideas about what a woman's role is.
Mm-hmm.
You can teach. You can go to the mission field. Put your life on the line. But pastoring, oh my, how brazen. So I say, be brazen, honey.
Okay.
If that's what you think God's called you to do, you'll know if it isn't, because it's tough.
Mm-hmm. So how have you built and continued to build great leadership skills in yourself?
Experience, education. I continually take classes. I worked in the real world for a number of years. In addition to, I was bivocational. That gives you some skills along the way. I was the admin to 2 corporate presidents, if you can't figure it out from that. I was observing the woman's role, and and in both of those situations, a woman would have never been considered for the corporate presidency.
So over the years in the ministry, what was the hardest obstacle you had to overcome, and how did you do so, and what did you learn from it?
Fighting traditions of the past in a church that don't make sense scripturally. I pastored in small town New England. They're tradition bound in their lives. And although I would never say I'm a millennial by any stretch, because I'm far too old for that, but there is a reality that you have to at least offer something.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't do it. They just simply would not do it. And I had never run into people who just would not budge. They didn't want to discuss it in deacons' meetings. They didn't want to discuss it as a church. It was off the plate. What they had worked for 50 years, and it would continue to work. And I said, look at your numbers. It isn't working. It's good enough for us. And I found that beyond reasonable. And you couldn't reason with them scripturally. You couldn't reason with them at all. And I finally said, thanks, but no thanks, I can't. You have to be able to move forward at some point.
Yeah.
And they were content in their little cloister. I had never run into that before. I mean, all churches have some degree of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to have hymns every Sunday, but they have a scriptural basis. Just saying no to say no makes no sense.
Yeah.
And it is a problem in New England in general. and in Appalachia. Less money breeds cliquey, that's not even a proper word. You'll never hear me quote Hillary again, but it does take a village. And in small towns, they are the village. And they all agree or they all disagree. And the outsider doesn't really have a... So that to me was one of the hardest things. And how I overcame it finally was giving up. Was that the proper thing to do? I don't know that I had an option. If you've tried everything you know to do, and prayer and God and you can't make the move, then sometimes you have to shake the dust off your feet and move on.
That's good. So what is one thing you know now that you wish you would have known when you started ministry?
I wish I'd started at 18 when I was first called and said, ha, 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 ha. And totally threw it away. Because my life would have been very different. I wish that I had believed the Rev at first suggestion. I wish I had jumped in with both feet when I did start, instead of edging my way in. And I wish I was younger so that I could still do it on a different basis than what I do. I have a real heart for evangelism and don't have the legs to do it anymore. And those are the sad things.
So what has been the most rewarding part of being a leader in ministry?
Seeing people saved, seeing people get it, understanding what you're telling them. I still teach some classes here in elective capacity, and I had an amazing class last year I was teaching Genesis, and when light bulbs go on or something is shared that nobody knew and we all go, wow, what a revelation. You know, there's nothing new under the sun, but there's a lot of things new to us. And when I'm studying to put a sermon together, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes on in my head, and you think, dummy, as old as you are and you're just figuring that out, or remembering that every little ache and pain is just part of getting older and you're not actually at death's door. You know, that sounds funny at your age, but I'm 78. And so you wonder, will I ever get used again? And people will say, oh, you're being used. Well, not in the capacity I was called to be used in. And that's very frustrating. On the one hand. On the other hand, there are great rewards. The kids that come in here and give me a hug, and the young adults who bring me flowers for my birthday last week, and that kind of thing. Those are very rewarding. But I think the greatest reward is when I see the God light bulb go on, and they get what you're saying, and their lives begin to change.
That's cool.